So, we're going to look at a 500-year-old book that holds a really fascinating secret. It's the story of epic adventure, and it was a massive, massive bestseller in its day. But its biggest legacy? Well, it got so popular that it inspired one of the most famous novels ever written, basically by driving its main character completely insane. Okay, let's get into it.
Right. First things first. Forget any ideas you have about dusty, boring old books. We're going back to the 1500s, to a time when one particular kind of story just completely took over popular culture all across Europe.
I mean, look at this guy. A knight, right in the thick of battle. This wasn't just some character in a book, he was a full-blown icon. An entire continent was obsessed with him. But what exactly was this kind of story?
Well, it belonged to a genre they called chivalric romance. And really, the best way to wrap your head around it is to think of it as the epic fantasy of its time. It had all the ingredients. You had noble knights going on impossible quests, you had monsters, and you had a whole lot of what they called courtly love. And I'm not kidding about the popularity. These stories were the absolute equivalent of our biggest superhero movie franchises today. They were translated, they were reprinted, and people from Spain to England just couldn't get enough of them. It was a total phenomenon.
And right at the very heart of this entire craze was one hero who was just bigger than all the rest. His name was Amadís of Gaul.
Amadís was, well, he was the perfect knight. He was literally everything a 16th century reader could ever want in a hero. Fearless in battle? Check. Unfailingly loyal to his king and his friends? You bet. Everything he did was for honor, and maybe most importantly, for the love of the beautiful Princess Oriana. He was the gold standard.
And his story, Amadís of Gaul, is this gigantic, sprawling epic. To really get his appeal, you've got to picture his journey. It starts out on horseback, with him and his buddies crossing these enchanted lands. And from there, he's facing down danger not just on land, but out on the high seas, fighting rivals and magical creatures, just constantly pushing against these impossible odds. In the whole point, the whole reason for this entire relentless quest, every single monster he slayed was just to prove his love and his worth to Princess Oriana. This was the ultimate romantic fantasy. So that's the story, but the actual physical book itself is just as incredible. The copy we're looking at here is a genuine work of art. Now, this isn't just any old copy of Amadís of Gaul. This specific one was printed in Seville, Spain, all the way back in 1531. It's a true treasure of bookmaking from that whole period. On its title page, there's this really important word, historiados. It's Old Spanish. And it just means historiated or, illustrated. The printer was literally advertising the pictures. These amazing woodcuts weren't just some nice decoration. They were a huge selling point. It was a promise of an action-packed visual ride. And you can really see the two sides of this book right here. On one hand, you have these pages packed with dense, Gothic text, a serious piece of literature. But on the other hand, you have these beautiful, ornate illustrations that made it so exciting, almost like a graphic novel for the 1500s. So you've got this perfect hero in a wildly popular book. And that combination, well, it leads to the absolute most fascinating part of our story, the book's completely unexpected legacy. It brings up a great question, doesn't it? What actually happens when a fictional idea becomes so popular, so inescapable, that maybe people start to lose their grip on what's real? And here it is. This is the connection. About 70 years after Amadís is at his peak, Miguel de Cervantes creates Don Quixote, a man who is obsessed with becoming a knight precisely because he's read too many books just like Amadís of Gaul. The comparison is just perfect. Amadís is the ideal knight, Quixote is a delusional imitator. Amadís fights actual giants, Quixote famously fights windmills. One story inspires admiration, and the other, as a direct result, inspires a parody. And that was the entire point. Cervantes wrote Don Quixote as a direct response to this whole Amadís craze. He looked around and saw a culture just saturated with these impossibly perfect heroes and created a character who tries and fails
hilariously, to live up to that ideal in the real world. It's a straight line. Without Amadís of Gaul, there is no Don Quixote. It's that simple.
So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Why does a nearly 500-year-old adventure story still matter today? Well, it perfectly illustrates this idea that great stories inspire people. But the greatest stories, the ones that become so influential they define a whole genre, eventually they invite parody. They become these huge cultural landmarks that the next generation just has to react to. And that's the beautiful legacy right there. Amadís of Gaul gave the world its perfect, idealized hero. And in direct response, Don Quixote gave us something that's arguably even more lasting, a flawed, all-too-human, and hilarious anti-hero. One literally could not exist without the other.
Which really just leaves us with a final thought. Think about the blockbusters and the cultural phenomena of our own time. Which ones are so big, so iconic, that in 50, maybe 100 years, they'll be the ones to inspire the next great satires? What's going to be the Don Quixote of our time?